Hi, I'm Tawana Wiggins, founder and CEO of Tyla's Chronicles Coaching and Consulting. There have been some iterations and updates to the services, bringing Tyla's Chronicles back to its original mission and focus. Allow me to reintroduce Tyla's Chronicles, where I support nurturing parental bonds and relationships, and including a more specific focus on empowering children with ADHD. So let me tell you just a little bit about myself. I have 19 years experience as an education administrator stemming from principal, teacher, counselor, and other various supportive services. I'm also a parent of 27 years, and building relationships is important for my students' success as well as my life success. Building relationships doesn't just mean relationship building with other people, but also relationship building with myself. It is important that I understand who I am continuously so that I can show up in spaces and places for my children and others who are helping to support my children and their success as well. Let's talk a little bit more about the ADHD component of it. My children, raising my own children with ADHD, I understand the necessities that come with raising children with ADHD, as well as the complexities. Raising children is difficult in itself, and teaching children is difficult in itself. But when you add a complexity of ADHD and other components, it heightens the complexity. And so it's important to me that we provide an environment and service where our families, as well as our children, can thrive. Doing that involves relationship building as well as understanding others. And so it's important that we look at those different aspects of having paired perspectives, understanding how people see things, having an intentional involvement, understanding the necessities of how we show up in spaces for our children, and then also having an aligned communication or conscious communication, understanding not just what we say, but how what we say is heard and interpreted by others so that we can be able to create habits of change and habits of just thriving and success. We also can remove our ego so that we understand that it's not always about us, and we just create a consistency of an engaging environment and having a mindset that is of others, a mindset that is inclusive, an inclusive mindset whereby we develop these nurturing and thriving environments for others. So I came about Tyla's Chronicles. It is named after my daughter, and it is chronicled as just learning her through her life. As I've mentioned, I have older children. I've been a parent for 27 years, but it is more recent with my youngest child where I've realized the complexities that come along with having a child with a neurodivergent brain and just experiencing her as I've experienced education and going through a day-to-day life aspect of how she thinks, how she interacts, and how she interprets the world. It is important for me to focus on those things and provide her with support necessary for her to be successful. And then recognizing the necessity overall, especially as we've come through the pandemic and seeing how our environments through the pandemic have not changed as much when it comes to teaching and educating our children. Experiences include and involve evolution, and that evolution of the environment as well as evolution of the brain. And so when we go through certain experience, something such traumatic and such altering as the pandemic, it's important for us to look at the services and the environments where our students or our children are engaged and look at how has the experience altered the thought or the mindset of the children. How has it altered, um, how has it how has the need shown up for a requirement of altering, if that makes sense. So just thinking about it this way, when we went through that remote learning process in the pandemic, and um, there's so many components that happened during that time. Um, for instance, just giving an example, and I felt like I rambled a little bit, so I'm going to get back to Tyla's Chronicles and how that came about, but I think it's important to talk about this portion. And so, for an example, when we think about young people, and I'm going to talk more specifically about my child who experienced kindergarten, half a year kindergarten, and then in school, and then the other half out of school. That those are nurturing years. Those are stamping moments in life. And part of her stamping moments, she experienced what we would have called traditional or what we have called normal settings. And then she experienced something that we have never experienced before. And during that time, there were certain characteristics and behaviors that developed and still are here. And so just being more specific, thinking about that particular time, um, at we have to remember, like when I say she started kindergarten, and she started kindergarten early at 4. And so she only had lived 4 years of her life. And during that time, at one moment, literally in a blink of an eye, one moment we were able to say hi to people, give people hugs and things of that nature. In a blink of an eye, we almost couldn't even look at people without feeling like our lives were in danger. Now, for us adults who have lived some time, we had some thought process of this could be over soon, because we've just had experiences whereby things change, things happen, and things of that nature. And so, although we were uncertain of what the this could be over soon would look like, or uncertain of what the next day would look like, each day was like, okay, maybe tomorrow, okay, maybe tomorrow, okay, maybe tomorrow. Plus, we just had access to so much information to give us a trajectory of a timeline or a trajectory of what could come next. Our children, not so much. And specifically thinking about my child being 4, in her mind, she could be like, wait, does this happen every 4 years? Is this the end? Have you experienced this before? And because we don't have those types of conversations where we sit down and we say, oh, this is not typical, or this is going to change. They are bombarded also with the amount of information and the conversations that are happening, and then they're left to interpret what that means for themselves. And so having such a short time on earth and not having your critical thinking processing skills, your conclusion process skills, not even having the space to develop those skills, leaves you to your own vices to come up with your own conclusions. And especially at such a young age when you don't even have an experience to bounce things off of, or having some type of norm to compare it to. And so I remember a specific time where my son was over, and he had some Skittles, and he had put them away. And later on, my daughter got into them and she ate them all. And typically pre-pandemic, that is, in my mind, childish behavior. So a kid finds candy, they eat it. No big deal. That's what they do. And you've seen those videos where you put the candy and say, don't eat it, and you kind of watch them, and they're like having these internal turmoils of eating the candy. So in my mind at that moment, that's what we're thinking. And so my son, asked her, like, why you don't eat people's things, you don't take people's things, things of that nature. Your typical, reprimand and conversation that you would have with regards to taking people's things and being respectful of others' belongings. And my daughter's response was, after, not in that moment, but after thinking about it, she responded and said, I'm sorry for taking and eating the Skittles. I just didn't know when I would ever get Skittles again. And that makes me a little bit emotional when I think about it, because at first, just being honest, I was like, you're full of it. Stop it. Like, you're stop it. But then as I sat and I thought, like, wow, that is her conclusion, knowing that in one moment we were able to talk to people, we were able to see people, we were able to hug people, we were able to go places, and then the next moment we weren't. And so in that moment, we lost something. And so her mind, she's like, I don't know if I'm going to ever get this again. So therefore, I need to, um, YOLO, really. And then that behavior continued. She started um, stacking snacks in her room, where it was like, hey, the world isn't going to end, but she didn't know. Heck, I didn't know. Um, and now that we are able to even be in a space and in a time where we can now socialize and interact with other people, that behavior and that mindset didn't change in so much regard. It was there. So that's the evolution of, through that time, there's been some evolution of behavior is in mindset. And when I say she doesn't stack snacks and things like that in her room anymore, but when she's going outside to play, she has a grocery bag full of snacks, a grocery bag full of things. And I try to explain to her, like, hey, it's not going to go anywhere. You can always come right back home and get it. You're only, 5 feet away from home. You can always come back, but she has to have that security. And she doesn't always even eat. Very rarely does she eat all of these snacks that she's taken, but it's a sense of security that I will have what I need just in case I never get it again. So just going back to that's really the conscious mindset, developing a mindset of understanding, building, engaging, to understand, listening to understand, having some conscious conversations, having some intentional involvements. Let's sit down, let's talk about this, having some paired perspectives. Let me understand where you're coming from. Those are things to help me understand how to operate and how to develop relationships. And then we throw in and we take it to the concept, or to not the concept, but take it to looking at, children with ADHD and how a neurodivergent brain would interpret and internalize such things, how those types of things and the environment in itself can lend itself to impulsive behavior or anxiety induced behavior because of the way that the brain operates. And we, as adults, as educators, as parents of children, need to recognize that our environments have to make a shift, just as our child's brains have shifted, and as understanding who our children are and understanding who people are, that's an important factor. One, in building relationships, and two, creating environments for our children to thrive, um, and just creating thriving environments overall. When we have strong relationships, that lends itself to a thriving environment. Um, and all of those aspects and concepts for building relationships, having a pair perspective, being intentional with your involvement, and being conscious with your conversations are stamping points for me in building relationships. And then throwing in the aspect, if you are working with a child with ADHD, it's important to, in all aspects of relationships, to develop a change your mindset, really. you and in changing your mindset, you have to be willing to remove your ego. Egos are important with some regards, but when you're building relationships, you have to set aside your ego so that you can be able to hear what the other person is saying and what they're not saying. And then that develops habits of success. And so just getting back to Tyla's Chronicles and the development of that, I started chronicling, her life, my daughter's life as a young child, really because we lived in New York, and all of my family is in New York. And so I started that as a way of journaling her life so that family can be involved. And it just continued and continued and continued. But through that process, I recognized who she was, who she is. And in recognizing who she is, she told me every day who I was. And so she's really showed me and built me into the person that I am today. My first two children, phenomenal, phenomenal children. And now just amazing, amazing adults, experienced me as a teacher, and they made me to who I was as a teacher. They've experienced me in that line and built and made me into that person. um, and then came the younger one who they made me, and then she shows me. And so I thought I knew who I was until I had this reflective little person, this reflective little human who, in every aspect and every action, shows me in every moment. And that builds me to be a better person. I can reflect back onto my parental practices and my educational practices with my older children, pulling the things that worked and then readjusting the things that now I realize that didn't work, or now I realize that we're not the best practice, so that I can do it better. Never having perfection, but being able to reflect on how I can do it better. And having that reflective practice allows me to be able to provide the services on helping other individuals do the same so that they can provide thriving environments for their children, not just for those with ADHD, but for their children and their family dynamic as a whole. The overall goal and purpose is to build relationships that are going to be one that create and develop a frame for picture perfect families. And when I say perfect, perfect doesn't mean there's no flaws and there's no problems, but perfect means what's perfect for you. Because when you know that you've put your all into the relationship, you put your all, being that it's not just all you, but you've listened, you've heard, you've adjusted, you've changed in some regards, then that is what makes the picture perfect family. That's what creates an environment where your children and others around you want to be a part of. Heck, you want to be a part of your own life and the life that you've helped to create. And then you model those same behaviors for your children as well, and others, and how you show people, you teach people how to treat you. And so when you model that behavior, you model it for your children on how to treat you and how they treat others. They then model it for others on how they want to be treated and need to be treated, and how they treat others, and continue, and it builds a legacy, and so on and so forth. And so that is the gist of Tyla's Chronicles. And yeah. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen, and thank you so much for your support. And for all information and contact, you can look at www.tylerschronicles.com. I also provide a podcast called Tawana Talks, which allows some insightful thoughts for just ones, meaning that the talks could just help just one person. And if that just one person is just me, then I'm just fine with that. But it could be for just you. And those are just daily reflections of my learned experiences that I've taken and been able to translate them into life experiences. I also provide parental tips, and those are tips that are tips that are pulled from classroom concepts that you could implement in your everyday life with your children and make it a norm and a change of habit. So again, thank you so much for your support, and thank you for taking the time to watch.